Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this 2021 budget hearing for the Borough of Carlisle. This evening, this is really a public meeting for residents and business owners of this borough to understand the budget that's being proposed by staff that will be adopted by council. And it's also an opportunity for residents to learn about the challenges the borough has faced in 2021 and the opportunities and challenges that will be before us in 2021. Now I'll turn things over to our Deputy Mayor and Finance Chair, Sean Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This evening we assemble to discuss the 2021 budget for the Borough of Carlisle. Our annual budget is one of the most significant ways we set our priorities and recognize our limitations. Through the document we discussed tonight, we face the adversity of fiscal balance amidst one of the most economically challenging moments of our lifetimes, for our government and for our fellow citizens and neighbors. Last year, Council recognized that the structural deficit of our largely built out borough, along with the state statutory revenue structures beyond our control that do not automatically keep pace with inflation, would eventually pressure us into a property tax increase, which a year ago we anticipated for the budget before us tonight. In the coming few years, a tax increase will become an absolute necessity as the cost of delivering crucial services to our community will outpace the often feeble revenue tools municipalities are provided. However, through months of hard work and planning while juggling the local challenges of a global pandemic, Borough Manager Armstrong and her staff have handed us a proposed budget with no tax increase. It is to our staff that we owe immense gratitude for their countless hours of work and preparation. Because of them, our jobs are made easier. The burdens of this year seem immeasurably heavy. Borough staff and council have recognized that many of our residents are wading through turbulent and treacherous economic conditions. Some have lost jobs that may not soon return. Others are presently underemployed and fighting to make ends meet. Although there is a hope seemingly on the horizon, the timing and path to get there remains unsure. We have been through a lot this year. We have forged our way together as a community. Fortunately, over the past decade, council and borough staff smartly planned and built a reserve for stormy times like these. That careful planning will allow us to do our part to blunt the economic blow to our neighbors as much as possible, while building pathways to reach for the once aspirational but now practical needs of our future. We provide the flexibility to answer our local responsibilities to address human-caused climate change. We meet our continued need to rehabilitate our aging water and wastewater systems. Our borough, like communities everywhere, must resolve ourselves to bring down the walls of systemic racism. We must provide for vital and core services of public safety and policing while allowing ourselves space to support our police department as it crafts itself into an organization that can continue proudly, professionally, and compassionately to meet the needs of our citizens. While on its face, the numbers and dollar signs seemingly say nothing of these demands upon us, these numbers are the foundation from which we launch our efforts. So thank you to every member of borough staff who has toiled over our budget. Your efforts this year and in years past continue to firmly plant our fiscal foundation upon a bedrock of thoughtful planning. So as we proceed tonight, we will walk through department by department after an overview from the borough manager. As we do with all of our public meetings, we provide an opportunity for public comment at the start and then again at the end. This evening, because we're walking through budget by budget, fund by fund, we'll give anybody who is in attendance and has any questions an opportunity to ask those questions or make those comments as we walk through each department. So we'll pause at the end of each of those funds. So with that and with thanks, I'll after a moment for public comment, I'll pass the meeting on to Borough Manager Armstrong. Is there anyone attending from the public who would like to provide any comment? And it appears there is none. So Borough Manager Armstrong, the floor is yours. You're on mute.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Mayor and Deputy Mayor. It is, with great pleasure that I'm sitting here before you with a number of very talented staff that really have stepped up this year. As we faced many challenges just starting the year, and as we worked through the budget, I have to just applaud each and every one of their efforts. Our budget preparation typically starts in July timeframe, and we work diligently on this. So every member of staff that you see present this evening, I applaud them for their efforts in bringing forward the budget that's before Borough Council this evening. You'll hear much more in depth about each of the departments, their challenges that they faced through COVID. You'll hear about their accomplishments. You'll hear also about some of their the challenges that they believe that they will face going forward into 2021. But I would like to also say a special recognition to Stephanie Taylor, who's going to be running the show this evening with the PowerPoint. And I just want to thank her for putting the PowerPoint together with key highlights that we'll use us throughout the evening. So with that being said, Stephanie, you want to go ahead and advance the slide? As we talk about this year, we can't talk about fiscal year 2020 without saying the word COVID-19 and the pandemic. And as you'll see in my budget message that is on the website, as well as it's available to anyone upon request, we talk a great bit about resilience in terms of financial, environmental, and also physical stewardship. And you'll hear about some of that this evening from each and every one of the departments. From the very beginning in March, when the pandemic hit, we went into action, and we had our Borough of Carlisle Emergency Management Coordinator, who you'll hear from shortly. He was key in a number of areas, but collaboration you'll see throughout the evening's presentations as well. And I just wanted to point to this screen. These are just a few of a number of initiatives that the Borough has undertaken just since March with respect to coordination and collaboration within our community. I think one thing that we have seen throughout the community since March of this year, well, and beyond, but the pandemic, it rose to a whole different level with respect to the community and the unity that we see within the community. And so we'll hear from Chief Snyder on the emergency management coordination activities that were undertaken. We also collaborated with the United Way for the Carlisle Area Emergency Response Fund that brought into the community about $120,000 worth of donations that were earmarked for food, shelter, hygiene, and other immediate needs within our community. We also partnered with the Community Action Network, which is about 90+ stakeholders that meet on a weekly basis, and we vet issues and solve them and within that forum. And many of those issues are humanitarian related and also with much focus on the underserved populations of our community. We also, you'll hear from Emergency Management Coordinator Jeff Snyder about the collaboration with the Community Cares. And I know that Andrea Krause will also speak in more depth about that. But throughout the pandemic, council and staff leadership have been actively engaged, not only with these groups, but elsewhere at the local, state, and federal levels. And it's been impressive. Next slide, Stephanie. We put in a number of strategies throughout the pandemic, and this is just a highlight of the strategies that were implemented. Again, you'll hear more about other ones that have been implemented throughout different departments, and you can also see a comprehensive list of these in the budget message. I think it's very important to note that there was a number of items that we knew initially that we had to get out quickly to the public. We recognized again the needs and that people were not working, and that we wanted to try our best to alleviate the burden and stress any way that we could. Moratoriums on late utility bill shutoffs, that continues. We also are not assessing late penalties on utility bills even currently. We've assisted in implementing internet and phone sales of trash bags and recycling bins, and that's ongoing. To date, we've delivered, I think, over 1,000 trash bags home delivery. And if you can advance, Stephanie. Some of the other ones that were very important during this time was another committee that was formed with the DCA, CADIC, Chamber, Borough, was a small business group committee and focused heavily on small business support and continue to disseminating the most accurate information to our small businesses. We've also, it was very important for council to implement strategies that could help accelerate recovery to our small businesses. We suspended the sidewalk ordinance to allow for businesses to utilize space not only in front of their business, but at adjacent properties as well. We temporarily lifted the open container ordinance in the C1 district, and that continues to be quite successful to this date. We opened our public park space. You'll hear more about that from Andrea Krause in Parks and Recreation. We also opened up parking lots for use as well for small business activities. And we just got out the door the other week, $149,750 to small businesses, grants that were made possible through the CARES Act. Those grants were afforded to 46 small businesses within the borough limits, and they ranged between $400 and $4,500. So next slide, please. So I thought it was important that we just spend just a little bit of time on this particular slide, and we'll focus more on the 2020 information, and we'll get into the 2021 information later in the presentation. But as Deputy Mayor Schultz noted, we started out the year knowing full well that we were operating with a budget deficit of $581,000, and that was January 1. 2.5 months into the new year, COVID hit, and we started to experience the impacts almost immediately, a drop in revenues. To this date, I think those revenues are estimated to be year-end about $340,000 less, primarily in license and fees and permitting. So, and park recreation fees as well. So between the revenue loss as well as knowing full well that we started the year off with a structural deficit, and we decided to really take a close look at operations internally here. We were able to capitalize on doing a hiring freeze of full-time positions that became vacant. There were 7 full-time positions that became vacant. and we were able to realize a savings of over $465,000 in fiscal year 2020. Seasonal and select part-time positions were also left on filled in fiscal year 2020 that resulted in almost another $200,000 of savings. And next slide, please. So altogether, what I'd like to say is that the deficit was, had we not done those adjustments, we would have been facing a deficit at the end of this year of 1.2 million. But because of some good decisions on staff's part, with discretionary spending, reining that in, as well as holding the line when the positions being filled and some of the projects, over $791,000 of savings was realized and another $133,000 in delays. So we closed that deficit from 1.2 million, and we think we're going to end this year in a much better position at $439,000 deficit. For this particular slide, it provides you a snapshot of the general fund as well as the primary enterprise funds. And we'll get into more detail, but as you'll see for the general fund, we are projecting a year-end deficit next year of $630,000 that we are proposing to be closed with utilizing fund balance reserves from that. The water fund is showing a deficit that's primarily capital, and we are proposing the 3.42% rate increase that you'll hear more about under the water fund. No other rate increases are proposed for parking, solid waste, sewer, or stormwater at this point. And we'll explain our rationale for all of those. Okay, now we're going to get into the general fund. And I think I'm going to pass it over at this point to Richard to start.
Okay, hello everyone. So going through the general fund, we have the general fund and capital projects shown here. And the reason for that is the capital projects is the fund that manages all of our general capital projects. And outside of any grants or debt issued, the general fund is responsible for it. So we kind of collect the two of them together for this summary. So you'll see here that fund balance goal is met. Council has established several percentages for each of the funds as to what fund balance reserve they want to have on hand to meet emergency needs. And in this particular fund, they set a goal of, or you set a goal of 25%. And at the end of 2021, we do anticipate being above that goal. And that just basically means that we have enough cash on hand to cover a certain amount of expenses. And in this case, the goal being 25% of expenses. As Susan mentioned, the general fund is showing a deficit, and this is an operating deficit, meaning that it's structural in the sense that our revenues are just insufficient to meet our expenses. At $630,000, we're going to be drawing from our fund balance reserves to help cover that cost. Now, the reserves that we have on hand are sufficient to meet that need, and as a result of that, we weren't proposing a 2021 tax increase, but instead taking a look during 2021 to see what's needed to reduce that deficit and hopefully set us on a course where fund balance isn't relied on as heavily going forward for operating needs. You'll see in our budget that the capital or the general fund is holding the line. Expenses overall decreased slightly, about $6,000. As we go through these slides, you'll see that it's almost an artificial decrease in the sense that we've made decisions to balance the budget, but going forward, if things aren't changed, expenses will rise, and we'll have to meet the needs of the services we offer. And then budget revenue slightly lower. Susan mentioned that. And for 2021, we didn't go crazy with the idea that, you know, what's the worst that could happen with another downturn or closures due to COVID-19. But instead, we took just a conservative approach on several areas. We looked back to our lowest year in the last couple of years and tried to budget conservatively with the expectation that in some areas we'll see revenues drop. But should the need arise, we will have the fund balance to meet those needs. So we can move along here. So in terms of debt, and right now all of our debt is issued in the Capital Projects Fund to finance all of our capital needs. The Borough issued in 2018 a line of credit to help cover the financing gaps between when grants are received or a possible TIF reimbursement is received and the expenses that are being incurred. So in 2021, the expectation is that line of credit will be called and we'll have to pay that back. So we're looking to refinance that with a debt issuance over a longer period. The Borough also guaranteed a certain amount of debt service on the TIF project. So when that project was implemented, we set aside, or we guaranteed a portion of the debt service, saying if the project can't cover the debt service needed, the Borough will provide some funding to help cover those costs in the first 5 years. We're currently in year 3 of the program with 2 years remaining. And the expectation is, due to slow development and slow increases in assessments on the property, it's likely that the Borough may have a guarantee called. The budget doesn't show anything in regards to anticipating repaying that, but it's something in the near future that we may have to address. And then also for the capital projects, we have several capital items that we would like to discuss, and I'm going to pass that over to Mark to go over.
All right, thank you, Richard, and good evening, everyone. As far as the general fund capital projects, we have approximately 7.3 million budgeted next year, and the majority of that is the continuation of the Carlisle Connectivity Project. We started that project this year as part of the Tagger component to it. We're using primarily federal and state grant funds to make up the bulk of the 7.3 million. And we expect that the Tagger project will be completed in 2021. And the next phase, which is the 5-point intersection at Penn and North Hanover Street, and the realignment of Carlisle Spring Road and North Hanover Street, will start next year and continue on into 2022. You'll be hearing about a lot of other capital projects proposed, but those are in other funds. This 7.2 is primarily just the general fund. And there's some smaller projects which either the police or Parks and Rec will discuss in their part of it. Richard?
Okay, so we'll move along and we'll get into expected budget cuts and delays, and Susan wanted to go over those items there.
Thank you. Yes, so when we first built the budget this year, we anticipated that we were still going to face a very large deficit. Our original budget was built, we showed a $1.5 million deficit. We did continue to explore where could we capitalize on some savings through collaboration among departments, restructuring activities, etc. And so took a very close look at labor and benefits. And one of the ones that we're very comfortable with proposing and have built it into the budget is that with respect to medical insurance, our medical insurance was initially proposed to go up 14.3%. which would have put it over $2.3 million. We were able to capitalize on over $220,000 worth of savings by making some modest plan designs that will feature for non-uniformed staff. Deductibles and co-pays will be changed slightly. Non-uniformed employees' payroll deductions for healthcare will increase on average about 29%. Uniformed will increase on average about 33.4%. Some folks might ask, why did medical rise? We've been having a very bad couple years with our claim experience ratio, and but just through some of these adjustments, we were able to take that 14.3 and get it down to 5.92%. Those positions that I spoke about earlier that we put a freeze on, temporary freeze in fiscal year 2020, are proposing that they stay open through July 1, at least July 1. Over the course of the next several months, we're going to continue to take a very close look at each and every one of those positions. And as I've assured you in the past, we will not fill those positions unless they're necessary. We're going to have to watch it closely to see if there are any negative impacts to service delivery from those positions. But we also think that there are still areas to streamline and become a little bit more efficient as well as effective here within our departments through additional collaboration. So we'll continue to report out on that. There was one full-time position that was eliminated. That would be a full-time position over the police departments, communication specialists, and various part-time salaries are anticipated to be reduced. Parks and Recreation Department, as well as reducing the police lobby hours on weekends by 16 hours. That realized us a savings. And then various other miscellaneous funds. All told, if you can go to the next slide, Steph, thanks. We were also able to take a close look at what was built into our capital and whether or not it was necessary. There were several big ticket items that both the police department as well as the Parks and Recreation Department pursued, and they were able to come back to us and say, we think that we're at least temporarily able to eliminate our requests from the capital plan for new roofs, as they had vendors come in that said that they just needed to be repaired. So say that the savings realized was significant. You'll also see delays there, some of the capital that was pushed out 1 year or up to 3 years. But all told, we are coming to you with reductions of $910,000. So we took that $1.5 million initial deficit. We're able to reduce it by 910 and get it down to what you see today of 630,000. And then, as Richard spoke, it is a structural deficit and is expected to continue. Richard, I'm going to hand it back over to you to see if you want to say anything more on that.
Yeah, so you went over the budget cuts and delays, and like I said earlier, we were able to lower the deficit to the 630, but that 1.5 is still looming, and it's something that we're going to have to address. And right now, you know, in 2021, we're going to look at where can we truly eliminate expenses and still meet the goals of the organization, and possibly, you know, what do we have to do in terms of a tax increase, and just take an overall look at this and how to eliminate that deficit. So that's a summary of the general fund, and we wanted to move on to just looking at the general fund at a higher level. The The general fund relies heavily on real estate taxes as its primary source of revenues. You'll see it on this chart here. The green is the real estate tax revenues at 39%. That's in terms of the overall revenue generated out of the general fund. We can only increase that revenue source through tax increases, through construction of new homes and businesses, and through county reassessments. We have on here, Carlisle has little room to grow. We're pretty built out. Now, the question may be posed, what about where the hotel is being built? And that's where we're referencing the tax increment financing project. And so any build out on that area is designated for the debt issued to repay. So we'll see little real estate revenue from that site as it builds out until several years from now. This slide here shows the reliance on property taxes as the overall generator for our general fund revenue. There's a slight increase as we're going through, and it fluctuates between 28 and 43% reliance throughout the years. That's going back to 1984. Go to the next slide. Our current tax is, our millage rate is 3.495. It's made out of two different components, one being general purpose. That covers anything in the general fund, meaning the police, fire department, parks and rec, anywhere that isn't generating other revenues to help cover the services provided. And then the fire services tax is designated strictly to fire-related expenses. So we will generate revenues from that tax that goes directly towards those costs. And then anything that isn't being covered by that will be supplemented through the general purposes tax. The next bullet point there shows that how it's generated is for every $1,000 of assessment that your property is, that's what you would multiply times that 3.495. So essentially, in the example here, $150,000, you would basically take 150, multiply it by the 3.495, and then you'd end up with what you'd be assessed by the borough of $524 in taxes. The next slide here, we're taking a look at how your dollar is broken out in terms of taxes. So the borough is the tax collector for the school district, Cumberland County, and the borough. And so sometimes people think that all their money is going straight to the borough, but you'll see here, in terms of the taxes that we collect on behalf of all the taxing bodies, the borough is 17 cents of every dollar you spend on taxes, property taxes, the largest going to the Carlisle School District, and then the smallest being the library tax that the county assesses. Move on to the next slide. So now we're moving into, well, I guess, I don't know if we wanted to have any questions. I'll hold off.
Why don't we pause for a moment? Are there any questions on anything so far from council? Okay. And I know we only have Tammy Gett from the public. Tammy, anytime you have a question, feel free to chime in. So you can move forward, Richard. Then.
Okay. So now we're going to get into our department overviews, and we'll just go ahead and start with my department, the finance department. We had several accomplishments during 2020. We received our audit report from our independent auditors. They gave us an unmodified opinion, which is the cleanest opinion you can get, meaning there's no major issues. We were able to get our Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for 2020, and we're going to be submitting that again. That's basically our budget document, and it goes through a rigorous process of having to meet certain qualifications, so we're pretty proud of that. We also submit our audit report, our financial statements, and they go through the similar process, meeting certain requirements in terms of how it's reported. And we did get an award for that for 2018. And then the last bullet point there, we finished out transitioning all utility billings from tenants to owner billings. Taking a look at that, we also have worked through identifying which properties are rental properties and have started going through our system, identifying those properties. It makes it a little easier to know if we're dealing with a tenant property or if it's an owner lived-in property. Go to the next slide. Looking forward, one of the biggest goals of the finance department is ensuring that we have long-term structural sustainability. We want to close this deficit and work closely with council to meet their goals while understanding the economy and what the borough's faced with to do so. We're happy to report that next year, the borough will start accepting credit cards and e-check payments for property taxes. We are working with the vendor Municipay, who will be organizing, running those processes. So if somebody did want to pay a fee to pay their taxes via credit card, they certainly have the ability to do that online or on site at the borough. Other departments will discuss this as well, but we're going to evaluate if it's possible to go to a monthly billing of utility bills pending a installation or upgrades to our smart water meters, which would allow us to remotely read the meters and more efficiently bill. That would just be a convenience to the consumer, where occasionally we'll have consumers who have water leaks, and this might help catch that sooner than later, but also would allow us the ability to identify those properties who may have a leak and notify the owners of the property before things get too bad. It's been a request that our department has received for some time, and we're looking forward to helping solve some of those issues. And then each year when we submit for the budget award, we get notes back in terms of how we can further improve our presentation, our book, and going forward, we seek to continually improve the book and make it better and more user-friendly. Okay. We'll go on to the fire department.
Chief Snyder, that looks like you. Chief, you're on mute.
How's that?
There we go.
I guess good evening. The first thing Borough Manager Armstrong wanted me to do was just give you a little overview of what has taken place with emergency management dealing with the COVID pandemic. And if you remember back in March, I gave you the first general briefing dealing with the pandemic. And I think at that time was only 200 cases or 200 individuals tested in Pennsylvania. And now we're to 5,900 positive cases today. So that briefing led to you declaring the emergency declaration so we could move forward with purchasing of needed supplies. The briefing to you, and we started COVID awareness training to all borough employees to understand the hazards associated with this pandemic, what they needed to do to protect themselves, and how we would acquire the PPE needed. The requirement for that and acquisition of that was going through from my office to the Cumberland County Department of Public Safety to the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. There was some supplies distributed to the borough and the EMS, but most of those supplies were trying to be diverted to the healthcare facilities. And eventually in that process, PEMA notified us that they would no longer accept requests for supplies. They would push out to where they thought those were needed when the supplies arrived. So we identified private vendors and established contracts for those, and at this time have significant supplies on hand and still are ordering some with grant money. Provided situation reports to the county on the weekly status of what was taking place with our organization, the borough. Worked with the borough manager and Carlisle Cares to establish the homeless shelter, which required cots from PEMA, which then came with several questions to address how would we deal with an individual that came in contact and tested positive with COVID, how would we isolate them? How would we clean the facilities? But all in all, that process worked real well, and quite proud of how that shook out for Carlisle Cares, that they could use that facility. Continually, the daily monitoring the CDC and the Department of Health guidelines. Today, there was new press release from the Department of Health on stressing again mask and travel restrictions, but continue to monitor those because those conditions change fluently, and provide those updates to the borough manager and community stakeholders. Early on, there was meetings with EMS to establish some type of action plan should the local EMS system be overwhelmed or challenges faced with positive COVID, how we would augment their system, whether we would use, for example, maybe public works employees to drive a unit, fire department to drive a unit. But fortunately, we didn't have to activate those plans. As we moved through the pandemic and businesses started to reopen, there was many questions fielded and understanding the COVID guidelines. Sometimes the guidelines seem to have information that didn't always appear to be clear to individuals, but it helped them with understanding the guidelines and review safety plans submitted by organizations for special events and those things. And so we continue to monitor the COVID updates, provide staff with weekly Department of Health reports, and continue to look at providing those PPE requirements for the borough. Questions on the COVID update?
Any questions from council? Doesn't look like it. Go ahead, Chief.
Okay, so next slide, Stephanie, is there? Well, the COVID challenges for the fire department basically, I think, breaks down into three big topic areas: the loss of revenue and fundraising for both companies. Both companies have lost their huge fundraisers, from raffles to their fair, and so that has been shut down since March, and that's in the ballpark of estimations around $110,000 right now for the organization. And currently, they have not had any shortfalls for general funding. Now, they anticipate that maybe for capital projects, some things may be put on hold, but currently, they're all right in the operating general fund. Professional development, although we trained 22 times as a department, our professional development was postponed. We had scheduled with the Dickinson College Public Safety for a large active assailant training program through the South Central Task Force, and that was postponed. All programs from the National Fire Academy, the Pennsylvania State Fire Academy, and local ETAs, which is Harrisburg Area Community College, Bucks Community College, were all postponed till about the end of August. So they have started back up. Currently, I have suspended all department training because of the surge in COVID. Bringing 25 to 27 firefighters together, I thought that was just could offer some challenges that it could have some significant outcomes if we would have some people that test positive. Fortunately for us, we remain healthy so far throughout the incident. All members are negative with COVID, so that's a good thing. But we will address going forward how to address professional development. We have rescheduled those for 2021, but if things change, we will have to address that internally, how we continue to offer professional development, such as the Firefighter 1 certification, Fire Officer 1, Instructor 1, all these things that build a good core of officers. And then reduced number of fire prevention programs. At this time last year, the organization, Carlisle Fire and Rescue and Union Fire Company, conducted 51 fire prevention programs, from fire extinguishers to talking to youth groups to children, churches. And right now we're currently at 12, and that's basically due to COVID and everything being shut down. So that's the basic three big challenges that we have faced as an organization. Next, Stephanie. The accomplishments, that PowerPoint's just a little hard for me to see, but we accomplished basically a Better Health grant of $5,000, and that was to buy PPE early on for Carlisle Fire and Rescue in the Union. Carlisle Fire and Rescue received a $50,000 paycheck protection loan, which provided us the ability to staff part-time employees from May to July. So that augmented our force. Both Union and Carlisle Fire and Rescue awarded COVID grants to the Office of the State Fire Commissioner's Office. They issued, I think the total of the two companies combined is close to $75,000. We continue to work with regional planning under the Emergency Service Working Group to establish some better activities than the one we're working currently, the operations group, which is made up of the fire chiefs of the two companies in the borough, Mount Holly Springs and North Middleton, is to establish pre-planning activities based on the NFPA standard and hopefully improve all organizations' ISO rating in that area. That committee has somewhat bogged down, I believe, in my opinion, due to COVID, but we need to keep moving ahead with that. And the bottom line there is to improve within the organizations. We have offered training jointly, and we're still discussing that, how to move forward with that in 2021. We do train monthly with Carlisle Barracks. They come to all our trainings when we had. In the previous budget, we increased the quarterly gift cards to $100 a quarter for members that meet certain criteria, which is pretty much similar to the tax incentive based on the number of trainings, activities at the station, on station hours, responses. They're awarded that, and some members take advantage of that. This, we're working with the Carlisle School District and have the Emergency Service Academy in session now. We are facing a few challenges with COVID. Right now, the school district is closed and virtual learning, and our program has not been developed for virtual learning. And I would have to get the blessing from the State Fire Academy in order to run some of those entry-level programs that way. So we have meetings with the school district tomorrow. There are 8 individuals enrolled in that program. What is new about the program this year is we started with juniors. And so the entry-level training to put a firefighter on the street at national certification is 200 hours. So if we can get the junior interested and we can complete 3 of those 4 modules in the junior year of high school, and then if the individual is 18, the senior year, we can get them in the interior firefighting module, which will allow them then to progress to take the Firefighter 1 certification test, which is required for our department. And let's see, we can had emergency operations training for the borough staff early in the year. And I think that pretty much sums up all the accomplishments. The accomplishments were successful based on the support and the work ethic of the members of Carlisle Fire and Rescue and Union Fire Company. They do a tremendous job for me. They just work extremely hard, and as is shown on some of the severe fires that we had within the borough this year, just an outstanding effort by those 2 organizations. Questions?
I'm not seeing any questions, Chief.
Okay, we're moving into the budget.
Okay, Chief, you've completed your department.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Chief Snyder. I think that's it. Chief Landis.
Okay. First of all, good evening, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about this. First of all, I've got to kudos to the borough manager and borough staff for supporting the police department throughout all this COVID craziness. We appreciate it. This year, we've taken on a lot of things. And what did we give you for your money? We've increased our bicycle patrol. Whoops, wait a minute, what happened? Go back one. Thank you. We've increased our bicycle patrol and our foot patrol throughout the borough. You'll notice you'll see these yellow shirts all over the place in the borough. Due to deficits, we also brought on a couple of new officers. I'd also want to draw your attention to this vehicle in the middle of your screen. We've got 3 vehicles we replaced with hybrid vehicles, which will give us a fuel savings, and we're finding that it's less wear and tear on the engine for the engine running all the time. Next. Calls for service despite COVID concerns. While the rest of the world stops for COVID, we still have multiple calls for service in the police department. A lot of our training is we did accomplish anyway, even with COVID, by doing online training. We also, there'll be a slide there about accreditation. We'll talk about our major cases and technology updates, some community events, and of course, again, the new department members. Please, Stephanie. In front of you, you can see our list of calls for service despite COVID is still pretty high. If you look at the year to date, you'll see that we are still, people are still calling the police and we're still responding. Thank you. One of the big things that we've had to keep going, what are we giving you for your money? We have to keep training. It's incumbent upon the police department to train regardless. So there's a total of 103 instances where officers attended training. Sometimes the entire department, while not together, sometimes in small groups or individuals. We did a lot of training online. A lot of people put out Zoom conferences that we've attended. Some things were restricted due to COVID, of course, but we are still trying to keep training. Some of the general topics that we've covered would be our incident command, effective policing, leadership. We're pushing leadership, communications. We're also pushing de-escalation. We've had hate crime training, search and seizure, range training, crisis intervention or mental health training, our use of force, and a duty to intervene. So not only are we practicing our use of force, but our duty to intervene if another officer may be going overboard. We've trained the Department of Policies, less lethal weapon qualifications. Of course, we always have our mandatory legal updates, handcuffing, and medical skills. Some of our specialized topics include financial crimes, our new K9, we'll see a picture of, we'll talk about in a minute, public information, online intelligence, instructor development, child crime investigations, our emergency management, drug recognition, computer crimes, homicide investigations, and hostage negotiations. For a second, we'll back. It's a trigger for me. For the hostage negotiation, we find that these guys who are negotiators, we find that their skills come useful on the street for de-escalation. So we're using these guys all the time. Go ahead, please. In June, the police department successfully completed our in-depth inspection for the 3-year accreditation. Okay, and what that is what is accreditation? Is showing that our policies, training, and equipment, and our facility are in compliance with best practices of law enforcement. Thank you. Some of the things that you may not know that we've dealt with throughout this year, which is we have had 5 homicides in the borough this year. And each time a loss of life means all stops are pulled out. We do everything we can to get to the bottom of those type crimes. We're working diligently on them. We've had 6 overdoses resulting in death, and those crimes require investigation. We've had several suicides, some arsons, we also had solicitation to commit murder in the borough. So all these crimes require us to just be a little bit more tedious about what we're doing and to make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's. And so all the money that we pay for training, this is when we do our homework, when we're doing these actual major case investigations. Go ahead, please. We've had some technology updates. As I said before, I spoke about the hybrid model vehicles. We've had 3 vehicles replaced with hybrid models. We talked about Axon, our existing body camera upgrade to more efficient models. A service plan to cover repairs and updates to TASER. We have a new electronic scheduling system for more efficiency. Several new laptops for evidence and administrative responsibilities, training, and with COVID, we're doing some working outside of the police department by using these laptops. Further technology upgrades, we had to upgrade the Wi-Fi for the police station to support the body worn cameras and the vehicle cameras. Various PPE for safety for the public, for safety of the public and officers. And I'd also let you know that the Carlisle Action Network supplied masks, and we'll be slapping on people as often as, placing on people's faces whenever they don't have a mask. Upgrades to the new dispatch system. That's not the dispatch system here at the police station. That's the system from the county that gives us our calls. Upgrades to the evidentiary storage and transfer system, how we put our evidence in and what goes up to the county. Expanded camera coverage for the borough, and we're still working on that. We'd like to get more coverage for the borough and better coverage. Next. We have not stopped our community events, and with this, I'm looking for a Christmas gift project. I've got a reminder here on my notepad to Councilman, what's his name? I just lost it. You said you'd pay $100 for the first guy that did 100 miles.
Oh, that was me.
Yeah, Councilman Hicks, get your money out.
All right.
For our Christmas party, for the kids from Big Brothers and Big Sisters. We're doing that, and that's the charity that we decided that you're going to donate to. We'll also, along that line of donating to charities, you'll notice our Carlisle police officers looking a little bit scruffy for the month of November, and they had to pay $100 to grow a beard for the month of November, which will go to charity for our kids that come to our Christmas party. We did reading for kids early on during this COVID. While school was out completely, we did online reading for kids. We've done canine demonstrations, church group meetings. We've actually started a program with Adopt a Cop for churches, Prayer with a Cop, where certain churches have had a police officer assigned to them. We still go to our community meetings. We work with Better Health, distributing wellness bags, safety trainings and presentations, Cocoa with a Cop at the YWCA. And again, as I said, you've seen increased foot and bike patrols. Next. New department members. 3 officers replenishing people from separations. We're up there now. And a new K9 to replace a retired K9, Pedro. Pedro is no longer with us. Pedro passed away during this year. And you'll see the picture there. That is Chaos. Now, you may wonder where Chaos comes from. It's homage to General Mattis. And that was his call sign, and it stands for the Colonel has another outstanding suggestion. So in this case, the chief has another outstanding suggestion. That's Chaos. Next. And that'll conclude. You can go back one. Thank you. Did I make it under the 8 minutes?
I think you did.
Good.
Are there any, we'll see if we can add to that though. Are there any questions from council for Chief Landis? Looks like you're off the hook, Chief. Thanks for the presentation. We'll move next to Parks and Rec. Andrea Krause.
Hello, good evening. All right, I'll wait till we get to the Parks and Rec. Okay, so the budget impact of COVID-19 for the Parks and Rec department was most felt in our revenues and our attendance numbers and within our recreation programs. The recreation program revenue, there is a slide here. Stephanie, if you want to move that forward. There's a slide. We're down about $80,000 in our recreation program revenue. Our community center revenue is down about $13,000. Pavilion revenue is down $1,900, and our buildings and grounds revenue, that's actually at a surplus, and that's mostly because of some consistent rentals we've had at the Gatehouse and Schaefer Cabin. Next slide, please. Okay, so a great deal of time was spent in 2020 on response to the COVID-19 pandemic for Parks and Recreation. We created facility reopening plans and policies and procedures. We did a health and safety plan for the reopening of our recreation programs and facilities. And we continually update those as things change, just like the mask mandate happened today. You know, we'll be taking a look at that and how that's gonna affect our programs that we have now. But some of the responses that we've had because of COVID-19, if you want to go to the next slide, the community center operated as a temporary shelter for community carers during a 4-month period. Manager Armstrong talked about that, and so did Chief Snyder. It was really a, you know, transitioning to and from was really smooth. So, you know, obviously it was a positive for our community during that time. Next slide, please. In response to the public health crisis, we also closed down our playground equipment during the pandemic. That included, you know, playground equipment, basketball courts, tennis courts. Those were closed basically from mid-March to mid-June during the red and the yellow phases, if everyone can remember the phases that we had. Also, the community pool didn't open for the season, and we did not host the annual Halloween parade that we typically have. So accomplishments, if you want to forward to the next slide. You know, the positive side of COVID, I don't think there is one, but, you know, what we've learned, I guess, with COVID is that, you know, we've really seen an increased use of park attendance. We've seen increases support for Parks and Recreation. We've seen, you know, a lot more support for that. And we've really learned that the value that our parks and open space and facilities bring to the residents of the community. So the Parks and Recreation Department, we implemented a COVID park use agreement. I think that started, I can't quite remember, maybe May or June, that we allowed small businesses to operate their fitness classes in our parks. Most of the small businesses held their classes at Thornwold Park, but we did also have a business operating at Lee Tort Park. So that was definitely a benefit for our small businesses during that time. During the stay-at-home orders, and while Parks and Rec office staff was temporarily relocated, during that time, we used social media to highlight our parks and trails. We also held our Summer Artist Series virtually during that time. And then in July, that's whenever we started, we actually started doing our in-person recreation programs. We started our summer day camp, softball, volleyball leagues, and we continue to hold Parks and Recreation programs, such as the next slide, where we've just hosted the Halloween costume contest and trunk or treat. All of our programs. We follow CDC guidelines and our health and safety plan. And really, we wouldn't be able to host all of the programs and have our community center open without our awesome Parks and Recreation staff. And here's a picture of Melinda Hench, Kelsey Neidick, and Kristen Ziegler. On the parks side of accomplishments, we did complete renovation of the Leetort Park bathrooms. Those were desperately needed to be renovated. We did a pool vending hut, and we worked on the main drain at the pool. All of those projects were with collaboration with the Public Works Department and the Water Resources Department. That was nice to have that collaboration during the time. The next slide, please. We also worked with the Carlisle Pickleball Association to install 4 new pickleball court lines on the east side of the tennis courts at Leetort Park. So you can move forward. Okay, so challenges moving forward in 21. The COVID responses and recovery continues to be a priority for Parks and Recreation. We will continue and will need to use effective and innovative funding methods to build, maintain, operate, and promote Parks and Recreation programs and services. Another challenge, if you want to move forward, Stephanie. Another challenge will be with the parks maintenance staffing. Susan talked about this a little earlier, but as far as staffing levels, but we are currently operating with three park maintainers. We typically have 4, with 1 being a supervisor. We have 163 acres of parkland, 17 parks, an outdoor pool, community center, and other outdoor facilities, and we remove snow in the winter, which is a small, it's a lot of work to do for a small crew. So staff will be looking at the issue and to determine future recommendations for staff levels. Fortunately, this year, as I mentioned before, and Manager Armstrong had talked about as well, the collaborative effort between the borough departments this year, it's actually been helpful, tremendously helpful this year, especially for our staff of 3, the Public Works Department and the Water Resources Department helped in the renovation work at our pool, parks. They did tree removals in April and May for us. There have been other things that they helped, but it's been very refreshing to have that type of team effort and very helpful as well. So that's it for Parks and Recreation. I don't know if there's any questions.
Any questions for Andrea?
Deputy Mayor Schultz, if I may add 2 points. I know that Andrea touched on it, but the work that went into transitioning the Stewart Community Center to the CARES, to Carlisle CARES, it would not have gone so smoothly without the leadership of Andrea and her team was totally supportive. We made that happen in 30 hours. So, I applaud you on that, Andrea, and your leadership on that. And also, Andrea alluded that she is down a person, and she has worked tirelessly with her staff, as well as her willingness and openness to working with other departments. I know they find it just as refreshing as what she does. So want to thank her for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks for noting all of that too, Susan. Appreciate that. especially the stepping up for community cares when they had nowhere else to go, and the community really stepped up. And I know, Andrew, you dove right into that and made it work. So appreciate that. Public Works, Mark Malrich.
Okay, I think we're going to go to.
Actually, I think it's community development.
Okay, I'm looking at the agenda. Okay, go ahead.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. What I wanted to do is, Stephanie, you can go to the second slide. Thanks. Is just to kind of contextualize the last 8.5 months. So I think we've all noticed, family and friends, and again, the codes department experienced the identical thing. So there was really, two major divisions. We saw, people that were, sheltered at home. They were dealing with family and economic issues, and sometimes they not necessarily responded in the best way. And that really manifested in a lot of property maintenance issues that we had to deal with. People calling in against their neighbors. And like I said, sometimes just venting at staff. However, there was another group, and those were the type where they responded in a more positive sense, and they would call into staff for, building renovations or zoning questions, or just some other kind of related things that they would, talk to codes. And I think we, saw early in the summer and in the fall dealing with the food trucks, et cetera. And what I'd like to do, at least looking at as we're going through these slides, is just kind of use that as a placeholder for moving forward when we get to the last couple of slides in terms of, building on that creative spirit for those that, respond well to this crisis situation. So as you can see from the activity that we've had over the last few months, definitely the budget for, the code section 413 is rather small. It's about 528,000. You can see that on page 290 and 291. And, there is a minor increase of about 9.9%, which really only represents about 48,000. So overall, it's a very small budget, but what we bring to the table with regards to revenues over the years is quite strong. Unfortunately, with this year, as you can see in the slide, we're really at a fraction of where we typically are. I have this bit of a monstrosity of a chart, so I'll just provide where we were back in 2019. So we had around 1,000 building permits, zoning permits, water and sewer taps altogether. And that amounted to just over $738,000. But more importantly, that amount for permitting represented around $32 million worth of investment, new buildings, new projects, et cetera, that accommodated with those permits. And for this year, we're about half. We're about 567 permits. And that only brought in about $161,000 for permit fees. And that represented just, 10 million in terms of investment, which is a good thing. But as you can see, it's a fraction of where we were back in 2019. If you go to the next slide, thanks. So without getting in too much, and these things are also indicated on page 167, 168. So like you heard tonight from the other departments, staff adapted to what we needed to get done, what should get done, and how we can best kind of at least navigate the pandemic. So these were kind of like the highlights that we did. One of the big things was having staff get much more involved with solid waste, dealing with the bags, the toters, et cetera. Next slide. So again, moving on, I mentioned when I talked about the second group, dealing with people with a lot of, creative questions, what they can do with their property, their home occupations, et cetera. that was a big thing, providing at least insight as to what they could do or can't do, or at least, you know, I think a lot of times we would respond by, we'll get back to you as soon as we can and provide you a better response. I think sometimes staff was trying to find that sort of accommodation in the process. So, you know, typically we don't track the number of calls, but I think definitely that's one thing that increased this year because people would, you know, be uncertain, they would look for guidance. So going forward to next year, again, my hope is that we'll see a lot more of those creative questions, the people that really have a passion to kind of, you know, soldier on and think about new ways either to, you know, grow their business or something new if they were either laid off, furloughed, or just now are seeking for a career change. What can we do as staff for, you know, building or zoning to help move that forward? And as you say, that has a definite impact, both in terms of our fees that we provide for the revenue stream, but more importantly, the amount of investment that's made for the community. So my hope is that, you know, despite being, you know, less than rosy, in some cases downright dismal in terms of where, again, my hope is that the people that brought something innovative or positive to the table will continue in the coming months. Next. So just in conclusion, like I say, if you had any questions, I'm happy to answer that, or if you would like to follow up an email, please do so.
Any questions from council? Okay, this time it is you, Mark.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you. Just like all the other departments, the Water Resources Department, it's been 2020 has been a year of adaptation as we've modified work schedules and practices to deal with the challenges of COVID to provide essential water services to our customers in our community. At the onset of the pandemic, we took a critical look at our staff, and we created work teams to limit the exposure among staff. We changed our schedules so that we had some folks working early in the morning to mid-afternoon, and then the other folks coming in late afternoon into the evening, again, to try to protect staff from potential contamination. We limited entrances to the facilities. We stopped our typical tours that we provide. Our environmental laboratory reduced the amount of outside services that it provides to other utilities, and just limited the testing that they do to inside the borough. Our supervisors made a point of making sure that all staff wore the appropriate PPE and conducted testing when they traveled or came in contact. We've had several individuals that self-quarantined for over a 14-day period because of potential contact with other individuals. And we took a critical look at all the capital improvement projects that we had scheduled in the budget for 2020. And we worked with our consultants and our contractors to modify schedules, get some things done that could be done, and postpone some other work so that we minimize the impact to water services in the community. We also postponed curb and sidewalk inspection programs so that we would not have a financial burden on residents that had to make repairs during the pandemic. Next slide. That being said, I think there's been several accomplishments that the department has completed this year. We had a new staff member start as our construction inspector, and he started a week before the shutdown, and no construction occurring. So what do you do? And we had him focus on utility street restoration, and he went through the backlog of a lot of the permitting that had not been completed, and he bird dogged the utilities, and over the last 8 months he's reduced the backlog of street cuts that had not been restored by over 80%, which I think is a great accomplishment for him. Some of the projects that we've completed, Public Works and Water Resources worked together and completed in-house the Excel stormwater diversion, so that now is completed, and we can put that project to bed. We initiated stormwater master plan. Several years ago, we did a complete evaluation of the sanitary sewer system, which resulted in our capital improvement plan to rehabilitate our sanitary sewer system. 2 years ago, we completed a similar evaluation of our water distribution system, which resulted in a water distribution master plan, and now we're doing the final one on our stormwater system, and we expect to complete that in 2021 and have a present to council a master plan to rehabilitate our stormwater facilities. One of the requirements we had under our stormwater permitting was to submit a Chesapeake Bay pollutant reduction plan. That was submitted at the beginning of the year, and we worked with DEP to get our plan approved. That plan was finally approved in June, and now we have in our in the budget going forward about $3 million in capital improvements to meet the requirements of the plan to reduce the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment that we discharge from our stormwater system. The Penn Street water painting tank, you see the photo there. Carlisle now shown both to the Turnpike and also to the Borough. That project was completed, and we expect to do the Ridge Street tank this year into next year. We focused the sanitary sewer rehabilitation on the northeast quadrant of the borough, and we have a meeting tomorrow with our contractor, and we expect to be done in the middle of December with that work. So that was a big focus this year for us. Also a focus was staff training and certifications. As several other department heads noted, it was very difficult to have training as we typically have in the past, but we still managed to have several staff complete certifications. Rick Friedman renewed his PennDOT concrete field testing certification, so that allowed him to do some work that we typically rely on consultants to do. Our MS4 coordinator completed a online training for Chesapeake Bay certified landscape professional, so that some of the green infrastructure projects that we undertake over the next couple of years, he'll be able to do the design and the maintenance related to those to that landscaping. We have 21. Go back. We have 21 staff members that have professional certification, either water operator, wastewater treatment plant operator, environmental technician, biosolids operator, that require professional development hours for their operator certifications, and that amounts to about 15 to 20 hours per year. And we were able to keep staff online to renew their certifications, mostly through online training. We have several staff that are volunteers either firefighters or emergency responders. And as Chief Snyder said, their training was reduced through the year, but they were still able to get some refresher courses in for hazmat, first aid, bloodborne pathogens training. So we're quite pleased by the staff that volunteer their time outside of work to provide those essential services. Next slide. As far as 2021, some of the projects that we have in the capital improvement plan, the Carlisle Connectivity Project continues. As I mentioned, that's about a $7 million project in budget for 2021. Sanitary sewer and water system distribution system rehabilitations continue, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation. The stormwater master plan will continue. Smart water meter conversion. The picture there shows one of the 820 that we've installed thus far out of the 7,000 that we're going to be doing over the next year to have radio transmitters transmit water meter data back to billing software, so that we don't have to manually go out and collect that data. And we will also be undertaking the biosolids management evaluation. Next slide. Some of the challenges, as I cover my hair there, we are facing. If you look at our water and wastewater certified operators, treatment operators, 40% of our certified operators are 60 or over. So we're facing this silver tsunami of folks that are going to be retiring over the next 5 years. 60% of our staff that have operator licenses are 60 and over. So that's a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge that will be retiring shortly. We've taken a number of steps to try to address this by cross-training younger staff with the older staff, continually updating our standard operating procedures. We're populating our databases with critical infrastructure information so that it's accessible to all staff. And we're asking those older staff to keep us informed of their retirement plan, so that we're not caught surprised by that. The other challenge we have is trying to keep our utility rates affordable. We're quite sensitive to that. I think if you look at the manager's budget message, you'll see a table in there that compares the borough's water and sewer utility fees to other communities in the other fees in the area. And we are on the lower end, but we have many challenges, and that'll cause those rates to rise. So we're constantly looking at ways to try to minimize those rate increases. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any marks, so I think you can keep rolling.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Richard, I believe.
Okay, so now we're moving into the water fund. We're going to kind of follow the same process as the general fund with our overview. This particular fund is still meeting council's goal in terms of reserves at 25%. The water fund and the sewer fund both have need for significant reserves just based on the aging infrastructure that we have in place and the uncertainty of how long that infrastructure will last and the needs of any given year. So we're happy to report that we're meeting the fund balance goal in that fund. We're showing an operating surplus, and it may be a little confusing with the fact that on the first the first table that we showed in this presentation, we're showing a deficit, and that is strictly related to capital needs. So as opposed to the general fund, where it's an operating deficit, we're comfortable using fund balance for capital needs. And water is one such fund, given the fact that these are one-time expenditures, and it's by design to have use of fund balance reserves to cover some of those costs. This fund is proposed to have a rate increase of 3.42%. This is based on a 2018 rate study performed by Ganna Fleming, taking a look at the rate increases over the next several years to fund the ongoing infrastructure improvements and the capital needs required by this fund. So even with the increase, the amount of revenue we're generating still requires the use of our existing fund balance to help cover those needs. And we'll continue to evaluate those each year to determine whether or not future rate increases are proposed. What this translates to, if a bill for a consumer, a typical consumer, is about $155, including water and sewer, the water portion of their bill would increase about $2.28 a quarter. Go to the next slide. 2021 debt issuance. We expect that in 2021, with the capital needs shown on the slide here, we'll have depleted all the remaining bond proceeds outstanding. The last time we issued debt for this fund was 2017. So with the depletion of those bond proceeds, we'll likely issue additional debt to help cover the capital needs. When we issue debt for these funds, we try to stick to an 80-20 split. That was the recommendation provided in the rate study. That allows us to issue 80% of the capital costs debt, taking advantage of low interest rates. And as interest rates rise in the future, we'll be able to utilize our fund balance reserves to help cover future capital needs. So we anticipate 2021 to have debt issued. I'll let Mark go into the highlights on the capital for water.
As far as the water fund capital plan for 2021, there's $5.5 million for capital improvements. That's primarily the continuation of the water distribution system rehabilitation program. The only piping that we really replaced in 2020 because of COVID was associated with the Tiger project. We put in new, replaced over 100-year-old piping on B Street. Next year, we expect to continue that project and replace about 2 miles of pipe in the downtown area with about a $3 million budget. The other components of the $5.5 million is approximately $1 million to complete the water smart meter enhancement program to put in the radio transmitters, and approximately another $1 million to replace the main transmission lines from our water treatment plant along Conneguinett Creek up Longs Gap Road to our two water storage reservoirs. Richard?
Okay, that wraps up the water fund. Are there any questions?
Doesn't look like it. So you can go ahead, Richard.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move into the sewer fund then. This fund is meeting. Oh, yeah, okay. Is meeting the fund balance goal. The goal for this one is higher at 50%, given the intensive capital needs of the fund. But we're happy to report that we are meeting those goals established. We are anticipating, with the current rate structure, to have an operating surplus even after capital expenses of about $588,000, and what that'll be used for is future infrastructure improvements going forward. For 2021, we are not proposing a rate adjustment. Given the fact that this fund has an operating surplus, we're going to delay the recommendation performed and that was given to us in the 2018 rate study, which had proposed 3.37% rate increase for 2021, and pushing that out and reviewing it possibly for 2022. So by delaying that, we're going to keep the rates of the sewer fund the same and still meet the needs of this coming year. In terms of a debt issuance, this is similar to the water fund. The sewer fund has progressed more rapidly in terms of the depletion of its bond proceeds that were issued. So going into 2021, we'll be looking to issue debt to help cover 80% of the capital needs in that fund. And I should state that when we issue debt, it goes to finance projects that have a life as long as the term of the debt. So we try to be responsible with the amount of debt that we issue. And then we'll move into the highlights of the capital for this fund.
All right. As far as following up on what Richard indicated, you know, the typical life of we're replacing some piping as far as our sanitary sewer rehabilitation program that may have been put in 1860, 1870. So, you know, we're putting in we're borrowing money for a 20-year period, but the life of the infrastructure that we're replacing is well over 100 years old. As far as capital improvements for 2021, we have $2.7 million in continuation of the sanitary sewer rehabilitation program, where we're replacing old piping or rehabilitating old piping by lining it. That project is going to continue. As I mentioned in the water resources summary, we address the northeast area of the borough. Next year, we're proposing to do the north central area of the borough around the lettered streets areas, just west of Carlisle Spring Road. We also have in the CIP an evaluation of our biosolids handling method. We currently produce residual from our wastewater treatment plant. You know, raw sewage comes into the treatment plant and clean water leaves, and the residual is biosolids that we currently handle by adding lime to stabilize it, and then we haul it out in liquid form to area farms for agricultural reuse. We'll be taking a critical look at that this year, and going through an evaluation to determine if changes need to be made to that. We have in the budget in our five-year capital improvement plan, $9.9 million next year for a ATAD project, which is for a biological stabilization, which reduces the volume of biosolids and also potentially produces some energy through that stabilization process. Overall, for our five-year CIP, we have $27 million in capital needs identified. So, you know, even though you see there's healthy reserves, that will be quickly depleted over the five-year period. And that's it for the sewer fund. If there's any questions.
Any questions from council? I'll keep asking. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, moving on to the stormwater fund. This is our newest fund. We established it in 2019. It was set up to manage all the operating expenses and capital expenses related to our stormwater infrastructure and projects. Previously, it was managed by our general fund, and what this does is, now that we've established a stormwater fee, it basically ensures that those fees are designated specifically for stormwater and allows us to track it separately. So council had established a goal for this fund of 25%, and we're happy to report that we anticipate meeting those fund balance reserves by the end of 2021. This fund initially borrowed money from the general fund in 2019 to help with cash flow, and happy to report that it'll be completely repaid by the end of 2020. So it'll be an established fund that's managing itself. We do anticipate an operating surplus of $149,000. Those funds will go into fund balance reserve and will be used on future capital needs to replace the aging infrastructure of our storm sewer. When this fund was established, we had a rate study performed that was determined based on the impervious coverage of the properties in the borough, and we established a rate based on the amount of revenue needs and that it would generate. We are not proposing a 2021 rate increase and feel that it's sufficient to meet the needs of the next couple of years. In terms of a debt issuance, we have not yet issued debt in this fund, but given the extensive capital needs, we're going to follow the same process of using 20% fund balance reserves and 80% debt issuance to help cover those capital needs until it's appropriate to adjust those limits. And I'll let Mark discuss the capital.
As far as the planned capital for next year, staff did this year apply for a grant for a leaf vacuum truck. Remove leaves from the road so they don't get into the storm sewer system and cause backups and clogging and flooding. If we are successful in securing that grant, it's a 90% grant, 10% local match. Then we're proposing to use those funds to purchase a leaf vacuum truck so that we'll be able to increase our level of service to the community. In addition to the amount budgeted for the vacuum truck, the remainder of the funds and the capital project for 2021 are all associated with the Chesapeake Bay Pollutant Reduction Plan implementation that I mentioned in water resources, and also the completion of the stormwater master plan. And that completes the overview for the stormwater fund. If there's any questions.
Looks like there are no questions, Mark.
Okay, moving on to our solid waste fund. This is the second fund that has an operating deficit, general fund being the first, and this is the second and of the two funds that we'll be presenting that have operating deficit. It is the only fund that will not meet council's goal of reserves. They established, or you've established a 25% goal for reserves, but last year with the increasing contract costs surrounding solid waste collection and disposal, we evaluated what our true reserve needs would be, and that for 2021 would be 7%. So while we're not at the 25%, we still have sufficient reserves to cover any emergency related expenses at this time. The operating deficit is primarily due to the rising contract costs and associated the trash bag sales. Currently, the fund is supplementing the trash bag rates to keep it lower and provide smoothing of the increases. And we're not proposing a rate increase for 2021. And the reason for that, like I said, fund balance reserve is still meeting the minimum requirements and allows us a little bit of flexibility to evaluate future contract costs and give us some time to determine where additional savings may be found. To increase the bag rates to meet the existing operating deficit, it would need to be at 628. Currently, we're at 585, but with our fund balance, the current budget is not proposed to adjust it to that level. This fund does not have any 2021 capital projects, and as a result of that, no debt issuance is proposed at this time. And that wraps up our solid waste fund.
Any questions on solid waste? Okay. Richard, are you continuing with us here?
Yeah, okay. Moving into our parking fund. I'm going to start with just a couple highlights on the parking fund before getting into the overview. We took some steps to help our residents as a result of COVID-19, and that included placing a moratorium on issuing parking tickets for our downtown parking meters, as well as our residential enforcements. We also stopped collecting lease and permit payments for our garage, just to provide the residents that live downtown an opportunity to park on the street and meet the governor's orders of staying at home and having the flexibility to do so. So we did see some decreases in revenues as a result of that. In the budget, you'll see we're proposing or we're projecting a $300,000 decrease from budgeted revenues in that fund. Moving along, we had the parking garage. We ended up not having part-time employees staffed during the height of the shutdown to help cover the gap between the revenues generated, the expenses, and the lack of revenues that are being generated. The CIP projects that were put on hold, they were pushed off until 2021, and that includes upgrades to our Pomfret Street lot. I won't go into detail on this chart, but that just gives you an example of where we were in terms of our revenues in 2019 as compared to 2020. Now, we did not have any management-related decisions to lower that revenue, other than the fact of the changes that we made for COVID. So all these decreases are primarily COVID-related. And the good news is that fund does have sufficient reserves to cover the gap in the revenues for a short period of time. Our 2021 accomplishments, we adjusted enforcement times of our parking meters. We reviewed several of our agreements and combined them into one agreement for our Cumberland County. We updated rates that jurors pay in our parking garage. We have an agreement with the county in regards to that, so we updated those rates. We implemented a parking program for Cumberland County adult probation. We reinstated the Cumberland County Victim Services parking agreement, and we built a retaining wall on our West Chapel Avenue parking lot. We work closely with the county and try, people try to meet their civic duties, and we try to be cognizant of that as we work with them as our partners. So we've done a lot with them this past year. Going into 2021, we're evaluating our meterhood program. We currently rent out meter hoods to contractors, and we're going to be taking a look at that process. The West Pomfret Street parking lot is going to be improved. That was the project that was planned for 2020 and was pushed out to 2021. Every couple years, we do interior maintenance on our parking garage, and we have that planned for 2021. These two projects were postponed from 2020 just due to trying to meet the COVID-related guidances and limitations on interacting with the public. We're currently still not enforcing our gold meters. We're allowing people to park there for free at this point, but we anticipate, depending on the direction that COVID takes, beginning enforcement of those again. And the gold meters are currently not smart. We had installed our smart meters downtown, and we updated the fees for those smart meters, and we'll be evaluating possible fees that we may need to adjust for our gold meters going forward. Okay, now taking a look at the fund overall, our fund balance goals met. We have a goal of 50%, and we're going to meet that. We have an operating surplus of $121,000. That first slide shows a deficit, but that's strictly for capital use. So we're happy to report that we're not going to be proposing a parking rate increase to cover that deficit. And we have sufficient reserves in place right now to cover our capital needs and some outstanding debt that we issued in 2017 that will be used. So we're not proposing any additional increases for 2021. And I'll let Mark go into the capital there a little bit. I think you're muted, Mark.
As far as the capital projects for next year, that includes what was deferred this year, as Richard mentioned, the Pomfret Street lot improvements. That includes both repaving and also incorporating some green infrastructure into that lot to try to reduce its impact to the stormwater system, and also maintenance improvements to the Pomfret Street garage. Any questions?
Council, any questions? No. Okay. All right. Merge us onto the highway fund and take us home.
Okay, so our highway aid fund is our last major fund that's budgeted. It's funded primarily through liquid fuels allocation, and our anticipation for 2021 based on notification received, we expect to see a decrease in the amount allocated. In 2020, we received $540,000, and in 2021, we expect to be about $496,000. As a result of that, we anticipate drawing $133,000 on fund balance reserves to meet the capital requirements. And this fund primarily funds our street paving, and it's an ongoing process. So the decrease in the liquid fuels allocation is a concern because it's a cost that is not going to go away. And should funding be depleted, it would become the responsibility of the general fund to figure out funding to pave our streets. Our fund balance for this fund is estimated right now at the end of 2021 to be 1.1 million. So the draw of 133,000 is not a huge amount in comparison, but given the decreasing revenues in that 1.1 will be could be depleted rather rapidly, given the need of about 660,000 in capital each year. I don't know if Mark had any additional stuff for that, or
the only comment is that we use liquid fuel funds primarily for street maintenance and also rehabilitation of our pedestrian curb ramps. Over the past several years, we've been relying on staff to do that. They were challenged this year because of COVID. We had a certain number that we wanted to do in-house before our paving contractor came on site, and it was a challenge. I think they finished the last 3 ramps the day before our paving contractor showed up. So they were able to get it done, and I applaud their efforts that they put in this year to get that. And we'll continue to try to use staff to rehabilitate ramps going forward next year as well. Any questions?
I'm going to guess no. Any questions, anyone? Okay, I was right. Okay. Does Susan, not that you have to, but is there anything you want to add here at the end?
Well, I'd just like to say that that's the conclusion of our presentation. We welcome and we encourage the public to go online, read the budget message, review the budget document. It's quite voluminous, but you know, we certainly do. I know that all of my staff joins me in this, that we welcome hearing from the community and sharing of perspectives. This is the community that we all live in and work in, and we're here to serve you. So this is as much, this is the community's budget. So we certainly would welcome hearing from you. I would also like to say again, another thank you to my staff. They've done a phenomenal job, not in just the development of the 2021 budget and holding the line on the 2020 finances, but just supporting the overall mission and being able to adapt to all the ever evolving challenges that this pandemic has had on us. So I just want to thank them for stepping up every time that they're called upon. And I just remain optimistic that our organization will continue to just carry out our mission. We'll do it as effectively and as efficiently as possible because services are service to the community is our #1 priority. And then just lastly, on behalf of staff, just want to thank Mayor Scott and each and every one of the council members for the opportunity to present tonight's budgets. And again, please feel free to reach out to us at any time with respect to any concerns that you have with the operations. Is like I say, we can always improve. There's always room for improvement. And just look forward to continuing to advance council's objectives. And with that being said, I think that, that's all I have. I don't know if my staff has anything to add, but thank you very much.
Susan, this is Joel. I have one really silly technical question. It was just on the last fund we were talking about, the highway fund. I was just curious, we don't track it on table 4 like we do the other funds. Can you remind me and the rest why we treat that a little differently?
I can touch on that. So that the table 4, what's presented there shows our operating fund balance, and the highway aid is all capital. So all the needs of that fund we don't track because you either do the project or you don't. And the other funds, we're trying to evaluate what are our reserves going to be to meet operating expenses, and the highway aid fund doesn't have any.
That's a great answer, and that makes perfect sense. Thanks.
Yep.
Any other comments or questions from council? Okay. Susan, Richard, all of staff, thanks again. Your professionalism shows through throughout the year and in this budget. An award-winning budget every year, and we understand that the absolute dedication that goes into this. It's not an overnight project. It's something that you're doing for the better part of the year. You probably feel that as you complete this one, you're almost moving on to the next one. And I would suggest on that note that because of sort of the unknown nature of the budget landscape we're getting into next year, that we ought to have, at least at the end of the first quarter, have an update on the outlook, maybe with our April workshop. I know we do the mid-year budget update, but it might be a good idea given the economic crisis we're in the midst of, that we take a good look at that in April. Any other comments, questions from council? Everybody on board with that idea? I'll take head nods. Okay. I should note that Councilor Fulham Winston was unable to make it this evening. So I will then move us to public comment, and I understand there's no public there at Borough Hall. That means Tammy Gett, you're still our only public. I know you've been feverishly live tweeting our meeting, and I think you're right. You did probably break a record on this one. And if there's no public comment, then we can work through a series, Councilor Crampsey and I can work through a series of motions to get this budget advertised for display. So I'll move that council approve for advertising the 2021 proposed budget for public display and public comment.
Chairman Schultz moves to display the 2021 proposed budget for public comment purposes. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries.
Okay, I move that council schedule a public hearing for December 10th, 2020 at 6:45 p.m. for the purpose of receiving public comment regarding the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget.
Deputy Schultz moves to schedule a public hearing for public comment on the proposed 2021 budget. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries.
And although we are not altering the millage rate on either the property tax or the fire tax, I do have to make the following motion. I move that council authorize the drafting and advertising of two ordinances. One, on the tax and fire ordinance, an ordinance levying a tax for general borough purposes for calendar year 2021 and succeeding years until altered by Borough Council at the rate of 3.058 mils on each dollar of assessed valuation of real estate, and furthermore retaining the fire service appropriations tax at 0.437 mils on each dollar of assessed valuation for year 2021 and succeeding years until altered by Borough Council. Secondly, moving that council approve for drafting and advertising an ordinance increasing water rates 3.42% for water rentals and charges for consumption billed subsequent to May 1st, 2021.
Deputy Mayor Schultz moves to draft and advertise two ordinances, a tax and fire ordinance and a water rate ordinance. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and properly seconded. Any further discussion on these items? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries.
And Mr. Mayor, that concludes our evening on the budget. So I'll leave it in your hands to take us to adjournment.
All right, no problem at all. Happy to do so. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.